You're in the Yoga Nook with Robbie. I'm Robbie S.D. Willick, and today we're going to do a 30 to 40 minute gentle general Hatha Yoga class. This is a class that is fairly general in nature. It's going to be more of a low intensity class, not a lot of transitions from up to down, not very demanding with stretch and strength, lower intensity, designed to gently mobilize the joints and some comfortable stretching of the muscle tissue throughout the body, a full body, entire body Hatha Yoga class. I invite you to take things at your own pace and at your own intensity, considering your own medical history, your own current state of injury and health, and really to find a balance between comfort and challenge in your practice. This is not about overdoing it. This is not about a significant challenge. This is a nice, easy challenge today. 30 to 40 minute gentle Hatha Yoga. We're going to start on our back. So with a yoga mat or a folded blanket, we're going to come to rest on our backs with our knees in a bent position. So we're looking up at the ceiling, a little space between the hands and the hips, palms facing up toward the ceiling. Our knees have a comfortable bend in them. If you're feeling any strain around the front of the knees, maybe walk the heels a little bit further away from the pelvis until you find that comfortable position. We're going to start with a dynamic version of Supta Parivartanasana. This is a gentle twist for the spine, a nice way to kind of wake up the different regions of the spine. And we're going to start fairly modestly with just a slight swivel of the hips, or moving the knees from side to side. Just starting with a couple of inches, a few inches, over to the left, back up to center, over to the right, and back up to center. We're keeping the shoulder blades here in contact with the floor. We're having our heads in contact with the floor. Really letting the contact points where you're feeling your body making contact with the surface, really let your body settle into those contact points. You can also start in Savasana, the restful pose, where you're just lying on your back, letting your body be fully supported. We're doing a little bit more of a dynamic grounding today. Over time, you can start to let the knees descend a little bit further down towards the right and to the left. But you're really attending to how you're feeling in that lower back area in particular, in the lumbar spine. As the knees move over to one side, we're engaging a bit of a twist of the spine, coming back up to center. We're coming back to neutral with the spine, over to the other side, twisting the spine again. So with those movements of the knees, we want to have slow, controlled movement. Paying attention to how we're feeling, not only in the lower back, but in our entire body, and keeping it comfortable. Now you can intensify this challenge if you wish. It's a little bit more of a core strengthener or stabilizer, waking up the core a little bit. You can take the heels or the feet off of the floor. And again, starting modestly, just a little swivel of the hips from side to side. Here, you can feel the abdominal muscles a little tensed, controlling the motion of the legs from side to side. You can also think about just drawing your navel, your belly button, slightly in towards your spine, like about an inch or a half inch. Just a little tucking of the abdomen or the belly button towards the spine. That's going to tone or tense the different layers of the abdominal muscles, contracting the abdominal muscles, your abs, so that you have more of a safe, controlled movement with the knees side to side. Again, control is the key here. We're not trying to get a lot of momentum. We're not trying to have a lot of speed. Nice, controlled movement side to side. Let's bring the feet back down to the mat. And just take a moment here with our knees bent to work with that concept of just grounding. Feeling the contact points of your spine where they're making some connection with your mat. Feeling the contact points along the length of your arms. Feeling that contact at the back of the head. Feeling the feet supported. You can even stretch out the legs briefly if you want to experience that more complete Savasana position. But just a moment to rest and ground. Maybe taking a couple of deeper breaths here too. An in-breath, really inflating the lungs, feeling the belly and the chest rising. And as you exhale, just a nice natural recoil of the tissues. You're not forcing the out-breath here. Just a nice, easy lowering of the belly and the chest. A natural recoil of the tissues. Let's do that one more time. A deeper breath in, feeling the belly expanding, the lower rib cage. Feeling the middle part of the rib cage, the breastbone expanding, and with the last little part of the in-breath at the collarbones, a little puff of air at the collarbones, and exhaling, the belly starting to descend, the lower ribs descending, the breastbone descending, and that little puff of air around the collarbones. We're going to continue with a little warm-up using a bolster here. We're going to stay on our backs. But we're going to do a dynamic version of the half bridge pose. You may not need the bolster. It's there if you are wanting more of a gentle introduction to waking up the spine. So we're going to sit on the bolster, carefully lowering using our elbows and our core strength to come onto our backs. We're going to keep those knees in a bent position, the feet about hip distance apart, the knees about hip distance apart. Here we have the hips elevated, so this is technically a mild inverted pose where we have blood flowing from the lower body towards the upper part of the body. And for people with high unregulated blood pressure or glaucoma, people needing to be careful of pressure in the heads, the eyes, you may want to come back down to a more neutral position without the bolster and be very modest with how far we come into this version of the half bridge pose, only an inch or two lifting the hips up from the surface you're resting on. But we want to engage a little toning of the abdomen again, thinking of tucking the belly button in towards the spine just to activate those layers of abdominal muscles. And then we're going to do a lifting of the hips away from the bolster up toward the ceiling. You can do that with an out breath if you like. And then lowering back with your in-breath, hips coming back down to contact the bolster. Exhaling, pressing up toward the ceiling. Inhaling, lowering back down. As we exhale, we tend to have a lowering of blood pressure. So as the pressure increases, as the hips raise towards the ceiling, the exhale helps us to regulate our blood pressure. Inhaling, hips coming back down. Again, just playing with how far. Maybe it's just a little baby lift. Maybe just an inch away from the bolster and coming back down. Attending to how you're feeling through that lower back. Go into a relative back bend, extension position with the spine as we lift the hips toward the ceiling. If you're wanting more of an active challenge, you can keep the hips elevated. We want to have our head facing neutral. I'm turning to face the camera, but our position wants to be neutral with the head, looking up toward the ceiling. And we want to have the pressure coming to bear across the shoulder blades and across the upper part of the back. We don't want a lot of pressure on the bones of the neck. We don't want a heap of pressure on the base of the skull. If you're elevating, keeping that breath flowing, avoiding the tendency to hold the breath. And again, you can just keep it dynamic, the up and down motion. Exhaling up toward the ceiling as far as feels comfortable for you. And inhaling, coming back down. We're going to take the bolster, put it to the side, and take our time to come up to a seated position, maybe transitioning through a side-lying position. Really taking all the time you need to come from that low position back up to a higher position. And we're going to do a little seated side stretch for the spine. I like to be perched up on a bolster for this. You may not need to. If you're maybe tight through the hips, sometimes a little perch up can be nice. Or you can try both options just to test how your body feels in that position. So we're coming to an easy seated position. You might have your legs even outstretched a little bit in front of you, or a crossed position. You can come into half lotus, full lotus. I'm just coming into a position that feels natural for my hips and my legs, but thinking initially of having a nice foundation through the surface area where our legs are contacting the mat and where our sits bones are contacting the bolster if you're using a bolster or a blanket. You may also want to have a block handy. If you do have a block or another bolster, we're going to use this for support in our side bend. So we'll take our hand, place it on the block. You can choose whatever height feels right for you and adjust that as needed. Our right hand on the block, our left hand lifting up toward the ceiling as far as is comfortable for your shoulder. So making modifications if you're feeling really compressed around the shoulder at this elevated level. You can make little modifications, but reaching as high up as you can, thinking about lengthening the spine, lifting the lower back out of the pelvis, lifting the rib cage out of the lower back, even lifting the neck out of the rib cage, out of the collarbone area. And exhaling, we're going to tilt over to the side, thinking of preserving that length through the entire spine. A little concavity on our right side, a little convexity on the left side, but keeping that extension through the spine, crown of the head moving away from the tailbone, the arm lifting out of the shoulder. We won't hold for too long. We'll come back to center and we'll change to the other side. So block coming to the left hand on the block, right hand elevating toward the ceiling, again as high as is comfortable for you, modifying as you need to, lifting the spine, lengthening, lower back out of pelvis, rib cage out of lower back, head and neck out of the collarbone area. Exhaling, leaning over to the left side, keeping that nice long arc of the spine, preserving the length of the spine, not a lot of collapsing and a crunching feeling happening through that lower back area, keeping that nice extension feeling, crown of the head, moving away from the tailbone. We'll come back to center. We're going to stay upright on the bolster. We're going to extend our left leg in front of us and keep the right knee bent. So you can play with the position of the right foot. You can have that foot extended close towards your left foot. It really depends on comfort around the hip, the knee, the lower back. You can bring that right foot to rest around the knee to land at the knee. You can bring that right foot close to the groin, to the inner thigh. Our left leg is going to stay extended. If you're up on a perch, a little bolster as I am, you may want some support, a blanket, a foamy, another bolster under that extended left leg. And we're going to work with Janu Sirsasana, the head to the knee pose. And this is a bit of a misnomer because our intention is not necessarily to bring the head down to the knee. This creates a lot of rounding through the lower back. We're trying to bring the chest forward, down towards our breastbone, down towards the knee. Thinking of hinging at the hips and not a lot of crunching and rounding happening through the lower back. So let's start with our hands on the bolster in front of us or on the knee. Take an in-breath, lifting the spine, lengthening out toward the ceiling. And then exhaling, just slow movements, walking the hands down the length of that left leg, attending to how you're feeling in through the lower back, maybe is building some tension. Typically you'll feel some tension through the back of that extended leg, the left leg in our case, through the calf muscles, through the hamstrings. We want to keep it comfortable, working for a nice, comfortable pulling sensation. We can take the left foot and dorsiflex, bring the top of the foot in towards the shin. This is going to create a little bit more of a tension on the chain of tissues through the back body and the calf and the hamstring area. But paying attention to the tension sensation that you're feeling through the back of the leg or through that lower back. And if you feel an easing of tension, a softening of the tissues that you're stretching, it may be appropriate for you to engage a little bit more of a stretch by just micro movements, walking those hands a little bit further down the leg. At the same time, thinking of keeping that spine long. A little bit of rounding in the lower back, that's okay. But we don't want to big collapse there. We want to keep the chest up, lifted, thinking of drawing the breastbone down towards that leg. You may have more flexibility through the hamstrings. You may be able to come down all the way towards the leg. Not appropriate for me, so I'm not going to try to demonstrate that. With your in-breath, let's lengthen, walking the hands back up that extended leg. Coming back to more of an upright position. I'm going to turn 90 degrees so you can see what my back is doing as we work on the other side here. So we'll come to our same position. Here, our left leg will be bent. Choosing a comfortable position for the knee and the hip on that left leg. Again, you can choose to have that left foot by the right ankle, the right knee, or close to the hip area. Maybe a little bit of support under that right knee. Thinking about lifting with an in-breath, lengthening the spine. Hands coming to the thigh, the knee, the shin. And with an out-breath, just walking the hands forward. Thinking about leading with the breastbone, the hinge happening at the hips, and not just a rounding and collapsing happening through that lower back. Little bit of rounding you can probably see in my spine, a little bit of roundedness through that lower back area. That's okay. That's naturally going to happen for most people, for many people in this position. But fairly lifted, fairly lengthened. Attending to how you're feeling. Again, typically through the back of the leg, maybe the lower back area, a little bit of tone or tightness of those muscles, but keeping it comfortable, finding that balance between comfort and challenge. Again, I'm looking to the camera, but we want to be looking down, our gaze just past the big toe of that extended right leg. You can take the foot, dorsiflex, pull the top of the foot in toward the shin, engaging more tension through the back of that right leg. And working with your breath, with every pose, you can really just draw your attention to your breath. Instead of your mind jumping from thought to thought or random thoughts, the breath serves as a nice anchor to really focus your attention or to redirect your mind to how you're feeling in your body as you're holding this stretch. Maybe even attending to changes of tension. Sometimes with an in-breath, you're perceiving a little bit more tension in through the areas that are being stretched, and a bit of a release with your out-breath. With your next in-breath, or whenever you're ready to release, walking the hands up the legs, coming back to a more neutral position. And we're going to do a little transition from a low position to a high position. For people who have low blood pressure, you do want to be careful with making those quick transitions. And I like to use the low squat or Malasana as a transition to help us to go safely from being more on the ground to more upright. So I'm building myself a little perch here using my blocks and using a bolster. I'm going to place these blocks at a position where I have them come to land under my sit bones, like both sides of the butt cheeks. So we're going to place our bolster on top of the blocks. You may not need that. You may even want, it depends on how low you're able to get down comfortably through the hips. The higher you are, the more unstable, so be aware of that. This tends to be a fairly stable position, just one bolster and two blocks. I have them on the medium height here. And here I can feel my sit bones have come to land on kind of a princess and the pea scenario. You can feel those blocks coming to land underneath your sit bones through that bolster. So this is a nice position to start. I'll turn 90 degrees so you can see what I'm doing here, but fairly lengthened spine, again, just sitting in this squat position. You can change again. Maybe you don't need that bolster. You're able to get further down toward the floor. And we're still going to start in a fairly lifted position, thinking about, again, the rib cage coming out of the lower back, the neck extending out of the collarbone area, and a nice even weight distribution on both sit bones. I'm going to come back to a more elevated position here. Turn to face the camera. Another option for you, instead of just being in this kind of perched position, is to do a little opening through the inner thigh. So taking a wider stance with the feet, maybe flaring the feet out about 45 degrees from that forward position. You can take your hands together, bringing the thumbs to the heart center, the breastbone area. Into the comfort of your wrists, you can go into an extension position or a bit of a back bend position for the wrists. If that's not comfortable, you don't push it. But bringing the hands down towards the floor, keeping the elbows pressing into the inner thigh area, maybe feeling an opening through the adductor muscle group, the muscles of the inner thigh. Maybe feeling a bit of an opening through that hip region, close to the tops of the thighs. If that's not comfortable for you, just bring the palms up, bring the knees a little bit closer together. You can even do a dynamic version where you build that tension, palms coming down toward the floor. Release that tension, coming back up. Maybe you'd also like to have a little bit of a rest for the muscles through the back of the neck, and you can let your head just simply drop down. Taking a few quiet breaths in this position. If you'd like to stay here for longer, of course, you're welcome to stay here longer. If you're ready to come out of this pose, slowly releasing the tension between the hands, letting the knees come closer together, sitting in an upright position. And when you feel ready, clear-headed, we're going to come to an upright position. So if you have the strength to push up from here, great. If you're finding it's a little bit challenging, you can have your hands in front of you, supporting with your hands as you straighten those legs, walking the hands up the thighs, walking the hands all the way back up to a standing position. There are a lot of nice versions of the sun salutation, but we're keeping the intensity fairly low. And in our class today, avoiding positions where we have a lot of movement from a low position to a high position. But a nice way to build up a little bit of heat in the body is through a dynamic version of the chair pose, Utkatasana. And I'll demonstrate this. So we're going to stand in Tadasana, mountain pose to begin. So feet about hip distance apart. Even weight distribution through the left foot and the right foot. Tiny, tiny forward bend in the knees so we're not locking the joints. Lengthening through the spine. From this position, we're going to try to preserve that even weight distribution throughout the feet as we move through our dynamic version of the chair pose. We're going to sit back. As we do so, our pelvis is coming behind us, our arms are coming in forward in front of us for a counterbalance, a counter pose. Squatting down to a position that feels comfortable for you. I'll turn 90 degrees so you can see what I do here. We'll do a few repetitions, squatting down, arms coming out in front as a counterbalance, coming back up. And you can do this with the rhythm of a breath if you want. Exhaling, pressing up. Inhaling, sitting back. Exhaling, pressing up. Inhaling, sitting back. If your balance is a little challenged to do this, you can also do this with the support of a chair, a sturdy chair behind you. In case getting down to that low position, you have a little fatigue of the muscles in the thigh and the hips and the lower back. That chair will be there to catch you. We're keeping the arms lengthened. When we come into our low position in front of us, or maybe a little upright towards the ceiling, keeping the neck in a neutral position in line with the upper back area. We'll do a couple more repetitions here. One more time. One thing to note here too, when you're coming into that low position, you want to keep the knees at a level vertically where they're not really going beyond the toes. The more the knees start to press beyond the toes, it creates a lot of strain around the front of the knees. So we want to avoid that. Just a little bit of a forward position of the shins from vertical. Coming back to a standing position, work briefly with the tree pose, a standing balance pose, Vrksasana. So we'll come back to mountain pose, Utkatasana, finding that even weight distribution, left foot and right foot. We're going to transfer our weight over to the left foot. Have a little bend in the right knee. Maybe you flare that knee out to the side, a little external rotation of the hip. We're going to take either this position as our beginner position where we keep the right foot in contact with the floor. A little forward bend in that left knee, so we're engaging the muscles to help us. We want to stay tall through this left hip and not jutting out to the side. You can stay here, or you can take your right foot off of the floor, place it below the knee, the heel below the knee, or more advanced, bringing the heel up towards the hip, pressing the foot into the inner thigh so the toes are above the knee. And then arms in whatever position works best for you to maintain your balance. You can be close to a wall, some surface to help you to check in with should you need that support. Hands can be at the heart center. You can have your arms out to the side, more advanced expression of that pose. Arms reaching up overhead, palms can come together. Whatever feels most natural for you, where you feel most balanced. You can also use a visual anchor, a little reference point, looking at the floor, something on the wall, maybe 6 to 8 feet out in front of you, and fixing your eyes on that spot, just to help give you that visual reference to maintain your balance in this position. Again, keeping a little softness, a little forward bend in that left knee. When you feel ready to release, as gracefully as possible, lowering that right leg back down to the floor, coming back to our mountain pose, Tadasana, finding that even weight distribution, left foot and right foot. And we'll switch over to the other side, so transferring the weight into the right foot. Tiny forward bend in that right knee, so we rely on the muscles and not locking the joint for our stability. That left foot, the mound of the foot, coming to the floor, keeping that left foot in contact with the floor if you're comfortable there, or increasing the balance challenge, having that left foot placed along the calf, or taking the left heel up towards the hip, placing the entire foot above the knee so the toes are above the knee. And again, whatever arm position works best for you, finding that visual reference on the floor or the wall, something to help fix your gaze and give you a little anchor to maintain your balance, your awareness in space. Noticing if you feel more stable on one side than the other. Trying to keep that grounded foot soft, that right foot soft, so we're not locking the foot, clenching the foot, digging the toes into the mat, keeping it fairly soft. When you're ready to come out of that pose, keeping that little tiny forward bend in the right knee, gracefully guiding that left foot back down to the floor, finding our mountain pose. We'll do one standing forward fold, Padangusthasana. So feet maybe hip distance apart. If you want to challenge yourself balance-wise, you can bring those feet a little further together, closer together. We're going to start with an in-breath, sweeping the arms up toward the ceiling, lengthening the spine. Exhale, folding forward, hinging at the hips. Hands can walk down the thighs and shins if you need that support. Maybe you limit your forward fold so the hands are on the shins. A little rounding through the lower back is okay. We're thinking of the sit bones tilting up toward the ceiling, the tailbone tilting up toward the ceiling. And if you're able to come into a lower position, you can take your index finger and your middle finger and just wrap it around your big toe. Don't need to be in that position. You can have your hands just on your shins or your thighs or on the tops of your feet or your knuckles, fists on the ground. You can let your head dangle down, lengthening through the back of the neck. Sit bones tilting up toward the ceiling. Thinking of lengthening through the backs of the legs, but not locking out the knee joints so they're tight and stiff. Maybe even a little forward bend through those legs. And just breathing through the holds. Inhale, you can visualize a lengthening of the spine. Exhale, maybe visualizing the area where you feel a stretch. And with your out breath, a softening of that area where you feel the stretch. Inhale, lengthening the spine. And exhale, softening around the stretch. Let's come out of this pose safely by bending the knees. We'll take the hands to the thighs. And then slowly, slowly walking the hands up, keeping the head looking down towards the floor, especially if you have low blood pressure. Slowly taking some time to bring the head back up to a neutral position. We're going to come back down to the floor. Going to do a brief back bend, Bhujangasana, the Cobra pose. Use a little bolster here for some support. Going to come right onto front body. We're going to have this bolster land so it comes to right at the lower part of the rib cage in the front. Not so much that it's compressing, but a little support for that lower rib cage, upper abdominal area. If this feels in your lower back like you're in too much of a back bend, you've got too much pressure in the lower back, well, you're going to bring that bolster forward so it comes more under the breastbone area, further towards the head of the mat. Our elbows are going to come to rest so the palms can face each other, or the palms can be on the mat or on the floor. We're keeping our legs stretched out behind us, the tops of the feet on the floor, the hips or the feet about hip distance apart. And as we hold this position, we're thinking again about lengthening through the spine. So lower back coming out of the pelvis, rib cage coming out of the lower back. As you in-breath, stay present with that idea of lengthening the spine. If you're feeling a little fatigued through the neck, you can take a break, just letting the head slowly drop down, lengthening through the back of the neck. And just breathing through the pose. Some full deep breaths, breathing in through your mouth or your nose, whatever feels most comfortable and natural for you. A few deep, focused, intentional breaths. To come out of the pose, we're going to lower our head down. We're going to take some pressure into the hands on either side of the mat, bring the toes to the mat, a little toning of the belly button, drawing it in towards the spine and pressing up away from the mat. We're going to do one more pose before our relaxation pose. This is a supported child's pose, or Balasana. We're going to use our blocks on the medium heights. And then we'll lie a bolster on top of those blocks. So we'll have one block basically lining up between the knees, a little bit of space between the knees. And resting our bolster on top of those blocks. We're going to come to rest so our belly lands on the bolster, the breastbone on the bolster, the head is resting on the bolster, and the arms are interwoven in the space between the blocks, or you can wrap your arms around the block supporting the head and clasp your hands. Thinking of some length between the shoulder blades. If this doesn't feel comfortable for your knees, you can also come onto your back and draw your knees into your chest in Utkatasana. The head is turned to the sides. If you find that's too much of a rotation for your neck, you can bring your head closer to the long edge of the bolster and rest your cheek on that long edge and look a little more down towards the floor. Just attending to that support you may feel around your breastbone, the ribcage area, and front body. Just letting your body settle into that support of the bolster and the block. And acknowledging that support, seeing if you're able to draw in maybe a slightly deeper breath with your in-breath. As you exhale, again, naturally, just going with the recoil of your body's tissues, not forcing that out breath. You can turn your head to the other side if you're wanting to strike a little balance with the position of the head. And you can stay here if you're comfortable being here. Or if you prefer to come to our final position, Savasana, which is a nice neutral way to finish a class. We'll do just a couple of minutes in Savasana where we're lying on our back, maybe a little support with a bolster underneath the knees. It's not necessary. Sometimes that helps to create more of a comfortable feeling in the lower back area. But in Savasana, right away, just checking into the areas where your body has some support. So on the floor, the bolster, your mat. And letting your body settle into those supports. Checking in with your breath. Just allowing yourself to breathe in a way that feels natural and restful for you. So maybe through your nose or your mouth. Over time, allowing your breath to settle into a slower, deeper rhythm. And if your mind is carried to thoughts that don't necessarily support you in this moment, you can redirect your attention back to those support points, back to those places where your body has some contact with the surface. And again, resettle into those surfaces. Just letting your body settle into all those supports, softening into those supports. Or bring it back to the breath, the feeling of your body as you breathe, the expansion of the belly and the chest, the recoil of the belly and the chest. The meditative, rhythmic sound of your breath as you draw the air in and release the air. Even the temperature of the air as you draw it in through your nose or your mouth, and as you exhale through your nose and your mouth. Can take quite a long time in Shavasana if you're wanting to stay here for a longer time. I invite you to do so. If you feel ready to finish your practice in your own time, in your own way, coming back up to a comfortable seated position, perhaps transitioning onto your side and taking a breath or two on your sides. Making just intuitive movements with your arms, your legs, your head, bringing movement back to your body. You can slowly find your way back up to a comfortable seated position. Sukhasana, easy seated pose. And once you're seated, reestablishing that foundation through the sits bones and the legs. And without forcing it, having a feeling of length through the spine, softness through the shoulders, softness in the face. If you like, with your next in-breath, you can sweep the arms up toward the ceiling, bringing the palms close together or together. Exhaling, drawing the hands down to the heart center, resting the thumbs on the breastbone. Namaste. Thank you for joining me.